Welcome and thank you for joining me. I am Barone and this is Just Another Voice. We're in an interesting place in the world of entertainment. Over the last decade and a half, the rise of the MCU has brought about an age in Hollywood in which studios' highest priority has been using cinematic universes to get viewers to buy seats just to see something with the same name and characters as a bunch of other things they love. And writers are focused only on making the spectacle as big as possible and the dialogue as fun and quippy as possible. Martin Scorsese started quite the controversy a little while back when he compared big bombastic superhero flicks to theme park rides and lamented the death of true cinema. But agree with his sentiment or not, he has a point that something is being lost in the art of visual storytelling. But things have gotten worse as streaming services have dominated the playing field of entertainment by increasing the convenience with which viewers can consume their content, but also reducing it to just that content. Studios have apparently been competing for viewership by striving to have the largest selection of ready to devour stuff on their platforms, and it has resulted in quantity being held over quality. And even those who just love their shallow, brainless spectacle have been noticing that the junk food isn't even up to its own standard. The fast food chains have pushed the artisan restaurants out of the industry and are now competing to be as cheap and efficient as possible. At a glance, art seems to be truly dead in entertainment, and studios don't enable artists to pour their talent and passion into their craft anymore. Instead, churning out as much safe, familiar, consumable content they can slap a recognizable name brand onto as they possibly can in a year. Cinema, as Scorsese would put it, is dying. But is it? Lately, it hasn't just been pretentious snobs like me who've been fighting back against this trend. In fact, it seems everywhere I look, people are sick of what has become of the franchises they fell in love with, and they recognize there's no soul left in them. And in contrast, the overwhelming success, in praise if not always in cash, of a few surprising gems has given me some hope that we might be on the verge of a turnaround of sorts. In the first half of this year, we have had three major releases that have blown me away and proven that there are still dedicated visionaries working in the field and audiences who are desperate for their craft. Let me talk a bit about each one in order of release and what their success means for the future of cinema. The Batman is my personal favorite of the films on this list. Not necessarily the best, but the one I love the most. I knew this was going to be something special from the very first trailer, and waited with anticipation through all the delays, more anxious than I've been for a theatrical release in a very long time. And boy, did it hold up. Well, mostly. I do have issues with the plot, as I've discussed in previous videos. I feel like it was largely driven along by a number of annoying conveniences and contrivances, and I was frustrated that Batman really didn't get to use his brain all that much in a film that's supposed to be the first true Batman detective thriller. But those things, while they knock the film down a bit in objective rating, don't do much, if anything, to drag this film from its spot as my all-time favorite superhero film. This Batman is easily the greatest Batman movie ever made. The richness and depth of the color and texture of the world made Gotham City a real, lived in character in its own right, that, while utterly distinct from any other city on Earth, felt as much a place you could actually visit as any other. The level of artistry required to make the setting of this film come to such vivid and visceral life is simply astounding. And every character in this film feels a part of that setting. It's not just a canvas these people are plopped onto, they feel an ingrained part of this world. But more importantly than that, Matt Reeves proves that he understands Batman as a character like no other filmmaker has. I think perhaps he could have done more in this film to really turn Bruce inside out and missed some opportunities to pull from Batman ego more overtly and really explore the origin of and reason for his rule to hold the vengeance he weaponizes in check. But I'm getting off track. Even if there's perhaps more he could have done in the story, Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson brought the broken character of Bruce Wayne to life in a way I couldn't have prepared myself for. Between the writing and the performance, this tortured man is made to feel like a real, believable person with more depth and nuance than I've ever seen conveyed with such subtlety. Through subtext alone, you come to truly understand what drives this man who has forged himself into an instrument of vengeance upon the world that hurt him. And over the course of the story, he comes to see himself for what he's become as he faces this twisted reflection of himself in the Riddler. This film understands what makes Batman tick and makes the audience understand him like no other film before it. And as a lifelong lover of the character, this is the live-action iteration of him I've been waiting for since I first discovered him. But what does this movie's success mean for cinema? What message might it send to studios, and what cause does it give us to hope? Well, the superhero genre is largely the cause and worst victim of the trend into soulless, spectacle based storytelling mediocrity that has consumed entertainment. Understandably, it's been blamed for the state of modern cinema by many, and a lot of people, myself included, are quite sick of the genre as a whole, as it has come to feel incredibly overdone and repetitive, despite Marvel's recent and not too successful attempts to branch out. But The Batman proved that superhero movies themselves are not the problem. It's the way they've been treated by studios. The Batman was just a good movie, crafted from the ground up by a true visionary and a team of incredible artists, all of whom understood and loved the source material they were working with. It was not just another title on a studio's slate of entries into their universe that had to do X, Y, and Z for the franchise, and that allowed it to stand on its own 2 feet, rather than be propped up by the framework around it. It proved that superhero films can still be good, can even be true art. They just need to be led by a vision beyond that of the studio's path towards a massive pile of cash, and crafted by people who care. The Norsemen is by far the smallest film on this list in terms of budget, built-in recognition, and box office success. Yet, at the same time, I would argue it is, objectively speaking, the best. It is nigh impossible for me to find any real flaws in this story. Only things I personally might have liked to be handled slightly differently, and those are few indeed. The reaction to this one is interesting because those who love director Robert Eggers' work in his previous 2 films often felt the film was too safe or unoriginal and blamed the studio, while those expecting a bigger, more epic, and more standard Viking war movie didn't really know what to make of the slow, personal, and often quite surreal tale that they were delivered. But I think just about everyone who has put expectations aside and accepted this movie for what it is has agreed that it is a masterpiece. Robert Eggers is a relatively up and coming director with 2 previous films under his belt, both extremely unique and highly surreal psychological thrillers, those being The Witch and The Lighthouse. Neither of which I have had the chance to see myself, unfortunately, so I can't give personal opinions on them. He has made his name by playing with and challenging the expectations and assumptions of the viewer, coaxing career best performances out of his actors, playing complex and nuanced characters to whom you are often left extremely invested in, while simultaneously unsure how to feel towards. And lastly, his unparalleled dedication to absolute and complete realism and authenticity in all the historical settings he creates. All of these things he brought to the Northmen, but where before he always worked on an incredibly small scale, now he was given the chance to go bigger. This time, his story could span more than a single location, and he was able to show what he could do with the freedom of a decent budget. The result was probably the most immersive and historically accurate dive into any culture of which we have so little reliable record as the Norse that has ever been put to film. Eggers spared nothing in researching every last insignificant prop so that it would be impossible to tell that the picture hadn't been filmed among actual Vikings in the 10th century. And the difference can be felt. It simply doesn't compare to any other historical epic in just how visceral and immersive its setting is. Every last detail just fits. No other sets on the scale of these have ever felt so three-dimensional, tangible, and lived in. The story, based on the Icelandic saga that inspired Shakespeare's Hamlet, is a simple enough concept. An exiled prince seeking to avenge his murdered father by reclaiming his kingdom from his traitorous uncle. But at every chance, Eggers subverts the built-in expectations of the genre and finds brilliant and unexpected ways to explore all of its characters. I don't want to go into spoilers in this video because I want you to go see all of these films, so I won't go into what exactly he did in deconstructing the protagonist and everyone around him, but I appreciated that he didn't try to glamorize any of his actions or make this a story about heroes and villains. Yet the characters' journeys are so compelling that you care for them and root for them, even while you know they're all really quite horrible people, and you don't honestly know how you really want this to end for them. It's a tragic journey that is brutally honest about the world in which it takes place and the characters it follows, never pulling punches and dragging you so deep into its vision, you'll utterly lose yourself in it. So what is the big takeaway of this film? I'd have to say that it's worth giving lesser known and more adventurous, even experimental filmmakers the chance to make bigger films. Big budget Hollywood is dominated by generic, run of the mill, Marvel esque action spectacles that can't be differentiated from one another. And it's time that more bold young visionaries like Eggers, with their own unique talents, styles, and approaches, are allowed to come in and freshen up the scenery. Trust these filmmakers who dare to do their own thing and go where no one has gone before, to take the resources they need to realize their potential and do things no one has done before. And while the results won't necessarily always be for everyone, they'll bring life back into the cinema as they challenge their audiences and pull them into immersive new worlds, leaving them with an experience they will remember and things to ponder, and people will come for it. This one's hard for me to describe exactly what it is that makes it so special to me. I say that if the Batman was the one that meant the most to me personally, and the Northman was the most technically flawless and most artistic, Top Gun Maverick's success was the most relieving and triumphant. Why? Well, Top Gun Maverick is a legacy sequel, and we live in a time where such sequels, reboots, and spin offs turning old classics into modern franchises and trying to recapture the success of the original are absolutely everywhere, but are almost universally despised. That is because most of these films do one of two things. Either they try to simply copy and paste the original formula in the hopes of maximizing nostalgia points and playing it safe, which more often than not simply leads to a boring rehash that misses what made the original so timeless. Or else they try to subvert expectations, do something new to freshen up the franchise, or worse, just use the instant recognition of the name to get people to watch their own creation. What makes Top Gun Maverick such an achievement is that it managed to do the impossible and hit that balance between honoring the original and going back to what made it so endearing, this time actually understanding what made it work in the first place, and simultaneously bringing enough new to the story to feel like something fresh and original, a respectful continuation rather than a rehash. And somehow, it managed to not only do that, but elevate it to new heights. Of course, in addition to being an incredible sequel and an already incredible classic, it is just a spectacular experience watching something so utterly real. Most movies now that would involve this type of action would rely heavily on CGI and effects, and it just wouldn't be the same. There's something about seeing real jets maneuvering in real landscapes and doing real dogfighting, with the actors inside actually flying them and feeling the speed and the G's, that makes the action totally riveting. Our brains know that this is real, and because of that, we feel we could be in the cockpit with the characters, and that's impossible to fake. I'm of course not saying VFX don't have their place, and aren't stunning when put to good use. Heck, I'm excited for Avatar 2, as you'll know if you've been around the channel for a bit, in part because of its use of CGI. But it simply can't replace the feeling of watching the real thing when it's possible to do it for real, especially when it comes to capturing the reactions of the characters. I think everything that makes this movie so good is summed up perfectly by Tom Cruise's message at the beginning of the movie. As he says, they strove to make the most immersive and authentic film experience they possibly could. And beyond that, they made it for the fans, for the people who already loved the characters and the story. And the film is evidence that he meant every word. I think the lesson of this movie is pretty obvious. This is how you do a legacy sequel. You can dredge up old, beloved classics all you want, but unless you truly love the original and understand why it works, and have the people who love the story in mind when you make it, and give your all to make it as incredible an experience as the original, it will only be a cheap imitation or a cruel spit in the face. This film should be the formula for all studios and filmmakers hoping to recapture the magic of a classic. When compared to such failures as Star Wars, Jurassic World, and Ghostbusters, just to name a few, it's not hard to see why this one worked where all the others failed. All three of these incredible films I'd easily call cinematic masterpieces, are pillars of hope in the sea of sludge that mainstream Hollywood has become. All three have so much in common, while all being incredibly different. In fact, the fact that they're all so different is a point to be made in itself. So much of what is made now is so forgettable because it's all just a lazy rehash of the last thing. There's little innovation or originality anymore. But all three of these films are totally distinct from anything else being made, and all feel completely fresh and original. That is what you get when your film is the product of a bold and creative vision that dares to innovate and do something new, that isn't afraid to be different from everything else. It's so refreshing. The real takeaway here is that all of these films were made by people who cared, people who loved what they were doing, what they were making. And in the case of the two films based on popular IPs, they did it for the people who loved the story they were building upon. The people making these films gave their absolute all, and it shines through, especially in contrast to everything else being made right now. Now, I want to acknowledge that these three films have not been the only decent pieces of entertainment in the last 6 months. There have been others I've enjoyed and which have broken the mold in some way, and some I've not had the chance to see, which might have made it on this list if I had. However, these three are the biggest of these kinds of films to have reached wide recognition, which I've been able to see, and I felt like each of them had something powerful to say to the studios about what people want in their films and how to fix the current state of Hollywood. More small and obscure films are always doing cool things, but it's the fact that these three got made in modern Hollywood with massive budgets for wide audiences that astounds me. But what do you consider to be the best films of 2022 so far? Give me your list in the comments. Also, what films are you most excited for in the months to come? There are a few more titles that look to be promising in the next few months, so let me know which are your most anticipated and why. Let the real discussion begin. Until next time, never stay silent.